Thanks everyone for coming to the conference and for sitting through me talking. And thanks to Mike for inviting me here. It's always nice when somebody is like, "Oh, you actually are a good speaker," because it makes me incredibly nervous to be speaking. I generally am talking about accessibility, but that is part of web governance strategy. So today my presentation will be, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. Must-haves for your web governance strategy. And while Mike introduced me, I thought I'd go into a little more detail about myself and how I got into web quality assurance and what I've learned over the years of working in the web, which is very odd because it doesn't feel like it's been that long, but at the same time, I will say. So when I was in high school, we got the internet in my house. And prior to that, I was taking classes at the local college for programming, learning Pascal and Ada, C. And when we got the internet at my house, I was able to not have to catch a ride over to the local college to be able to do my work. I also was able to do things that are questionable now about like chatting with strangers on the internet and things that like we just didn't have an understanding for how big that would become and how readily available it would become to so many people and how quick things would start changing. And so to me, that was the big thing, was just that I had a lot more patience back then, and that sound that you just heard was something that, you know, like became something that like brought me interest into this world of like actually thinking about what the future could hold, but also knowing the past that didn't involve easy access to the internet. So I think that my generation is one of the last generations to know a world before the internet and after the internet. And I think that makes me in some ways a little more skeptical about the direction of how things are going. And that's why I'm very grateful to have my position at DubBot, because I feel like a lot of what I'm doing is helping things get better and not just throwing stuff out there. Like, I'm helping people think about how they can edit what's there and improve what's there, and in some cases minimize, you know, what we're keeping out there for good. So I did go to Georgia Tech. Let me see. Oh, the sound is very low. So there is sound. Let me see if I can. Is there, I think the volume was on this screen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, let's see. I think you have to do it on your laptop.
Oh, okay.
To go through the.
I think it was. So that's the sound, and I heard it, but it was very quiet.
And we had heard the dial-up, right?
Yes. So it might just be that this part is quiet. So anyways, I was trying to incorporate a little bit of music, and the quote was from Dolly Parton's Working 9 to 5. Got my coffee and my ambition. So I went to Georgia Tech, and one of the things that I thought was amusing with Georgia Tech is that I moved into the dorms freshman year, and that was the first time I actually had access to real high-speed internet. That was also the time when Napster was like blowing up, and I had quite a music catalog freshman year of college because Georgia Tech was struggling to put in place guardrails to prevent students from downloading music on their network. And every time they would put something in place, the students of Georgia Tech were countering that with abilities to get around those barriers. And so at one point, Georgia Tech released an official statement saying they give up. They can't really keep their students from accessing this because the more investment they put into the time of preventing it, the students are countering it. So I thought that was kind of an interesting place to be at, where Georgia Tech was, trying to put in place guardrails for stuff, and the students were just saying no. At the same time, MySpace was getting big, which I started out as a computer science major at Georgia Tech, and so I was learning to code pages, web pages from scratch, and learning like best practices with that. And people who had limited technical skills were like spinning out web pages and putting content out there with like so little time and effort required that it was very cool to see. But at the same time, it was like, well, I'm learning all the standards and it's taking me like days to do this right, weeks sometimes. And just to see that like there was this like, just you could like put anything out on the internet pretty much, and anybody could have a web page. So at first it was, when I was in high school, people were starting to be able to interact on the web, but now people were actually being able to create content for the web. And that became something that people just expect now, is just, you don't have to have the technical skills or the knowledge of standards, but you can just do it. And so that's when I went to work at the Division of Public Health after college, where I ran into this idea that we should be able to do things more quickly than what is realistic. And I have to say there, I had a great boss that I was very young, and he would send me to these meetings with these people who are content experts, been in public health for decades. And they would be, requesting different sorts of websites be spun up to feature whatever they were doing with their program. And thankfully, we had a basic web governance strategy where we outlined the branding guidelines. We outlined the different things that could be used. While I worked at the state, we were using Flash for animation, and that was fun because then the iPhone came out and Flash no longer worked. So we had to like pivot and recreate everything we had done in Flash, and also understanding the accessibility implications of how we were building things. So I will say, with working at the Division of Public Health, one of the things that stuck with me is that I was going and interacting with content experts, but trying to impart on them web standards that they're like, well, what are you talking about? Like my teenage son can throw this up on a website, why can't you? And getting them to understand that there is this process in place because we are a government agency, we have to adhere to certain standards. And that was just like the beginning of understanding, accessibility and what all is entailed there. I was once asked to make a red, white, and blue website for somebody who had like a program that they wanted to feature on July 4th, but our color scheme was like peach and green because we are Georgia and known for peaches. And so I was able to say no to that person, and this is why. And that to me, like being able to speak to somebody who is decades older than me was very good for my confidence, and good that my manager was able to delegate those responsibilities and make me feel comfortable going to meetings and pushing back where needed. So after I left the state, I went to work for Hannon Hill, makers of Cascade CMS. There I did web development, getting people up and going in the CMS, a lot like what a lot of you probably do with Drupal right now, is making templates. And while I was there so long, we had remediation projects starting to pop up, and people with limited budget, trying to help them understand where they can make fixes in their template to improve the user experience significantly and to cover the most accessibility issues with the least budget. And then where experts would be required to fix this stuff, we could employ end users with a little bit of training to focus on these issues that are part of their content. and helping people come up with a strategy to say, okay, if you want to be able to add or edit content, you need to have this basic understanding of best practices for websites, SEO, and accessibility. So I also became a mother, and this is amusing because while I'm talking about web governance strategy, one of the things that I found that is interesting is that I also, in my spare time, have to come up with a digital governance policy for my own house. I know as a teenager what the dangers were of myself being on the internet, looking back, hindsight. And so I know having a young child, there are certain applications that I don't want him on. There are ads I don't want him seeing. They may be marked appropriate for a younger audience, but they're not content I want him exposed to. No screens at dinner time is a big thing in our house. So just knowing the impacts or like trying to navigate the impacts of technology, and my son having like now a social life can say, well, this friend does this, and me saying, well, that's not our policy in our house. And so I think that translates really well to talking about web governance, because just because another school or organization is doing something doesn't mean it's appropriate for what you're doing. And so having the web governance strategy gives you the why of that. So now I work at Dubbot, and that's where I do guiding users on being able to set up custom policies to flag issues that are custom to their organization, but also giving explanations as to the accessibility issues that are being displayed or reported. Let's see, anything I missed? So my superpowers, and it seems like my music is not gonna play today. There we go. Oops. So that's problematic. I'm going to take a pause in case the music needs to be edited out for the purposes of uploading the video. So my superpowers is I'm a web developer background. That's what I did a lot in school and after school. I like simplifying and enabling approachability. So I'm very big on not just saying no, but no, here's why. I also believe that a lot of us have the ability to learn. And so sometimes somebody wants to do something, and it's just that they need, to be empowered to know, why or why not. I think most people are good people. So I am an optimistic person that I think everybody mostly wants to do good, but they just need the right tools. I have a high standard for work product, so that means that I spend a lot more time than I should sometimes on stuff. But I also want to push people I work with to do better. I have the background with accessibility standards, and I am a people pleaser. I hate telling people no, so that's where I have to have something of why. So the drawbacks I have are I high things on high shelves. I'm very short. It's nice because I have a kid now, and I just lift him up on the counter and say, get that. But I tend to go down rabbit holes easily, so I can spend a lot of time trying to figure out a best approach for something, and sometimes it's well, maybe we shouldn't be doing that to begin with. I'm more frank than most people expect, so sometimes it catches people off guard because I do like to say yes a lot, but then when I'm wait a minute, we can't do that, or this is not a good idea. Or people can just read my face. I have that face that's just when somebody says something, I'm ooh, and I'm no, it's okay. But I'm a people pleaser, and so that gets me into trouble sometimes with trying to do things that are outside of the scope of what I should be doing. I'm optimistic, so a lot of times I think something's going to take a lot less time than it will. And I also sometimes suffer from imposter syndrome, which is where web governance strategies have helped me, because it gives me an outline of what my responsibilities are. So why web governance? The internet is, and a lot of you probably have inherited a website from turnover, or just having stepped into a role or role shifting. The internet is like a jungle, and trying to rein in what is happening can be trying at times and can feel overwhelming. So that's the quote, "Life is demanding without understanding." Web governance, it is really good if you can give a clear picture of the scope of what is involved. It will make people more rational with their requests. It will also make you not look like a person who just says no to say no, not a controlling person. That did not play. Right. So that's same as it ever was, same as it ever was, same as it ever was. So I run into this a lot when I know a lot of us work at jobs for more than a couple years. You end up getting restructured. When I worked at the Division of Public Health, it was weird because I worked in the Office of Health Information Policy. The website was managed for the Division of Public Health from within a smaller department and not by IT. And so we had an IT team, and so there was always this question, depending on who was in charge that year, about why is the website managed by this team in this department and not under IT. And so there was also questions about why certain things got priorities. And so having a web governance policy helped us, or strategy, helped us to outline why that has been the case over the years and what the ramifications of moving it would be. So for instance, with the state of Georgia, the Office of Health Information Policy, they had the technical knowledge because they had to manage the data for the health stats. And so if you moved it under IT, you would be replicating the resources, and the people they were able to be more agile, I guess is a good way to put it, because so much of the work needed to be done on getting the stats updated for over the year, that the website was a priority, but it was we were able to reuse resources that people were doing stats and database stuff for the health, that they were also able to work on the website. And it was able to leverage those resources. So with a web governance strategy, you're able to empower team members. When I was at the Division of Public Health, I was able to go to those meetings and say, this is why we're doing what we're doing, or this is why it will take this long, without people saying, well, your boss should be at this meeting. And it was nice for me to grow my career there, and get the understanding of how to interact with people, to get them on board, and to get their content from them. So the web governance approach is to determine your audience for the mediums. So if you don't have a web governance strategy, the first thing to do is to outline, for instance, who your website is geared towards. A lot of organizations I run into find that people want to treat their internet site as an intranet. And so giving people the understanding that these are the different web properties, and this is the intended audience, and these are the focuses of the different areas, so that you're able to tackle who should be putting what on the internet. should inventory your resources, and I don't just mean your website properties, but your team. You know, what sort of expertise do you have on your team? What is realistic for your team members' abilities? What would you need to be able to do things that maybe people are requesting that you can't currently do? But just generally being very forthright, like this is like the amount of resources we have, and you know, like this is what we can accomplish. Then outlining roles. So you should be able to say, you know, like if you want training on how to update something in the CMS, this is the path you go. If you want to have an update made for your site for you, this is the path you should go. So giving a very clear instructions on, you know, what different sort of requests people might be having and who is responsible for that. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a named person, but just like having like an email that's a contact for those roles. And then to provide a process. So, you know, the different requests that you get, there should be a process for like submitting a request for those things, getting access to Drupal, for instance. What sort of training do people need to go through? And if somebody wants to use a new sort of embed on their site, what is the process for getting that third-party embed approved for use within the website? And I'll go into in a moment why, like the different things for that process of like adding embeds and stuff onto your website. So the must-haves for web governance in my mind are branding guidelines. This helps you push back on people wanting custom templates being spun up and unrealistic expectations. We have Title IX information. If you receive federal funding, you should have a link to the Title IX details on your website. And then the ones that I'm going to dive into a little more are accessibility policies. So these are things that could cost your university money and really shift priorities if somebody files a complaint. And also it's the right thing to do. Privacy considerations, I think that the younger generation in some ways are more aware of not wanting their content shared or knowing how their content or details are being used. And then broken link policies. So this is, you know, making sure that your website is reputable, is reputable by making sure people are updating their content to not have broken links, and that when somebody accesses a page, it loads for them. Okay, so accessibility policies. So the very first thing that you should definitely have on your website, if you don't have it already, is an accessibility statement. There's a lot of good examples on the web, especially from other higher ed organizations. But an accessibility statement will give you, you know, that clout that you are, you know, thinking in standards, web standards, for making an accessible website. It also explains why some things might take a little longer than people expect, because a lot of things that people interact with aren't accessible, but your website should be accessible. Easy ways to report issues and get help. So this is a big thing that I've seen in a number of complaints, and the way to, you know, first start solving them is to provide a contact usually in the accessibility statement for someone to be able to report an issue on your website and have like a contact of knowing how to report it and how they can get like details on when you expect something like that would be addressed. Just allowing people to feel heard is a really important thing, and in doing that, it doesn't necessarily have to be that they can use whatever is on your website, but that you're providing a way for them to get an alternative to it. So it might be that you don't even know something is not accessible. Like somebody might have put something on your website despite having a policy saying that it needs to be accessible. Somebody might, add a third-party embed and without your knowledge, and so like having that first easy ability to contact you versus having to escalate it will save you a lot of headache. So document minimum requirements for content widgets maintained on the site. So that is, educating your users that things need to be accessible and, explaining to them what accessibility means. Oops, now it loads. So with that, you should, mention that there are standards that are WCAG 2.1 for the most part. 2.2 did come out. So if you want to reference WCAG 2.2, but most policy legislation references WCAG 2.1. So depending on how you think people might receive that, you can say, we're going to strive for our website and anything that's used within our website to be WCAG compliant. So accessibility must distill down. Images need descriptive text. So making sure that content editors know if they're adding images to sites, that they have a description or what would cause them to be decorative. So if you're going to allow people to mark an image as decorative, what is that policy? And then making sure that if it's not, that people understand how to make proper image alt text. With that, you can also, in your branding guidelines, say what size images people should be using and what are appropriate kinds of images. Like if somebody's doing headshots, is it okay for it to be a more casual headshot, or are there stipulations for if people are putting images of themselves on the web, what are those guidelines? Videos need corresponding captions or transcripts. So what sort of services are you going to allow to be used for embedding video and audio? And how do you plan to audit that video and audio to ensure that proper captions and transcripts are provided? And third-party embedded widgets need to be audited for accessibility before use within the website. For a lot of us, that ship sailed. That's one of the biggest things I get at Dubbot from users is, there's nothing I can do about this widget. It's third-party code. What should I do? Can I ignore the issue? And I always say, well, you can ignore the issue, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and it's not your responsibility. So really putting it out there front and center that if you are putting something in your website, whether it's made by somebody else, you are still responsible for the accessibility of that widget or providing an alternative for being able to get that same information or same interaction in some other means. So I know, like, I'm playing music that, like, I'm going to link to a Spotify playlist, and the Spotify embeds, last time I checked, definitely not accessible. You get like stuck in the scrolling feature. So just making sure people know that, like, in your web governance policy, if you're using something that is third party, if it's in your website, it's your responsibility. So you can't just like be like, not my problem. And I think the web governance, having it in the web governance strategy, I think makes it more clear to a lot of people. Colors used should adhere to WCAG 2 AA color contrast requirements. Recently, I ran into somebody who was saying that they don't like to have links underlined because it doesn't look good. And the color contrast requirements say that you have to have a certain contrast level or the underline when it's within content areas. And so, explaining to them that, like, WCAG criteria is just, like, right now a colorblind person, a person with color blindness or color issues, might not know there's a link there without the underline. So while it doesn't look stylistically appealing to you, if somebody doesn't know it's there, does it really exist? So just, outlining like these basics are key to making an accessible website. And then the understanding that you're going to test for keyboard, screen reader, and Zoom assistive technology compliance. So a lot of people don't realize that people with a disability, need to use assistive technology. I think a lot of people just say, well, they're not coming to our website. They don't exist, which is horrible, to be honest. But I think it's just misinformed. And so really just making people understand that there is a way for these users to be accessing your website, and what we should be doing is doing the testing for people who are going to be using that technology, just like we would be testing for mobile availability and mobile display. We need to be working into our processes testing for keyboard, screen reader, and Zoom technologies. Honestly, it wasn't that long ago that I realized that it's not like somebody is, vision impaired that they don't see at all, or they see, but also realizing the intricacies of testing with Zoom software. There is, a lot of us aren't black or white, it's not that straightforward. You should be testing with combinations of different technologies, just like we test with combinations of browsers. So I'm going to test on my iPhone, I'm going to test using Chrome, Safari, and on my Mac, I'm going to test Safari, Chrome, Firefox, and on a Windows, I'll test Edge and Brave and Chrome. So those combinations should be taken into consideration as well with your web governance strategy, and just outlining that these are things we're going to test before we roll out new designs or use different modules that are available. So privacy policies. So I like MC Hammer's Can't Touch This, and in my nod to that sort of generation, I've got my shoulder pads in my sweatshirt. So you should definitely have a privacy policy statement, and a lot of privacy policy statements you want to outline what sort of code you're using or third-party scripts you're using that could be collecting people's information, because it's not usually us, at least in my experience, when I worked at the Division of Public Health, I wasn't putting something together to collect somebody's data. But when I embed something in that site, or when I use a script that's a third party, there's oftentimes that script includes cookieing and the user, the visitor, that's how the website is making this seamless interaction. But what is that third party doing with my user's data? And making sure that there is a way a user can audit what sort of third parties could be getting their information from your website, from using your website. So an easy way for visitors to report issues and get help. So a lot of times I've run into this where somebody who is a web visitor realizes a problem before I would notice it. So it's always good, just like with the accessibility policy, to let them know that you are there for their feedback and that you want to get the information if they have it. It makes your life a lot easier, again, without that being escalated over you. So requirements that third-party tools use and adhere to GDPR standards. So although GDPR standards are big enforcements in California and Europe and Canada right now, and there's many states that don't really have a policy, you're probably not just having visitors from your state. So if you are looking to get student applicants from Europe, European countries, the EU, from California, from Canada, you should really be considering whether you're following the GDPR standards. Okay, so that was Dear, I fear we're facing a problem. So broken link policies. So number one, and this was something that I learned fairly recently in the last few years, is that it's not just good enough to make sure that you have a 404 page showing when you have a broken link on your website. You need to make sure that the status is reporting as 404, because that's what gets read through the screen reader. So if you're not returning a 404 status with your 404 page, a user will think that that page loaded properly until they get to the content area, and then they're like, well, I just wasted my time navigating through this page. And making sure they have a way to go back to the page that had the broken link is really important. And I will say with this one, actually, there was a complaint. I was helping somebody work through like the priorities of like where they should start. And this was like the one like low-hanging fruit where I was like, this is just a server configuration. Like, I don't understand why like months later you haven't fixed it, and why this hasn't been like a priority. So just making sure that, you know, your broken links, they report properly. Also that we're fixing our broken links expediently. So sometimes a broken link is going to be broken because it's you know, not the content changed or the endpoint changed, like you're linking to an outside source. But also monitoring so that you can fix those broken links, and who's going to be responsible for fixing the links that are broken. And then expectations for archived content. So I know a lot of people in here, you have events. They might have things where you could buy tickets to the event, or you might have a news article about the event and the event expires. What is the realistic expectation for fixing those links, and is it, you know, the lower priority than maybe something else? Is it something where you're going to have a way of marking the page that it is archived content and that some of the links may not be available anymore? So to me, that's just the like kind of the baseline on broken links. So So that was a sample from Whip It. I love that song. It like gives me energy to fix things. I usually like to have like a day or two a week where I just am like heads down, like I'm going to be productive and do work, not take meetings. And so those are the days where I like will put it on my playlist of like different songs that inspire me, and Whip It is oddly one of them, because even if things are not going well, you can still whip it and you can move forward, and you can improve. So if you have a web governance strategy, hopefully during this presentation you've gotten an idea of something you might be able to include, something you could improve. If you don't have a web governance strategy, you can start going ahead and figuring out what it would take to be put in place, and at least say, like, these are the things we should be, outlining expectations for our website. These are the roles we have on our team. This is the realistic expectation of what we can do in a, when given an ask. So hopefully something with this resonated. So I'm happy to make this more conversational now. So if you have anything on your mind or heart, I'm sorry the sound was off on the music clips. I have to go back to editing and making sure volume is standardized across audio. Apparently I did not do a great job of that. But yeah, there's the Spotify. I guess that's not a good way to link it since you are looking at it. But I will update that so that it has the text in it. But yeah, I'll share these slides as well with anybody who wants them.